Hello, Terrell here, owner of Evolution Movement. So I'm here with the owner of Jojo's Ventures, an NYC tourism company. How you doing, Joseph?
Hey, how you doing, Terrell? Thank you for having me.
Thank you, thank you. So I started this platform to bring people in the community together with different like small businesses, entrepreneurs, and people just making a difference in our community. And I actually saw your platform on Instagram, and I was like, this is very interesting. Like, obviously, I wouldn't consider myself a historian, but I always like to learn history, especially of New York City. I'm born and raised here in New York. And like I have a lot of history here. Like my grandparents lived here, my parents lived here. So it's very interesting. So I wanted to bring you on to tell us a little bit about your story and like where you're from and what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I am a born and bred New Yorker, just like yourself. I grew up mostly uptown between Harlem and the Bronx, but I've lived in Brooklyn at some point in time in my life. I've lived in Queens at some point in time in my life. And, I just a natural New Yorker, as you say. We're endangered species, if you will, in my generation, because a lot of the people that I grew up with have migrated either west to the West Coast or down south.
Yeah.
So I'm one of the last of the Mohegans, the real New Yorkers that's still here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I fully understand. I see like when I go other places, especially like down south, like Carolinas or Florida, and there's so many New Yorkers, like everywhere I go, it's like it's people that are moving down there. So it is pretty rare to and that's why I also wanted to bring like I started this platform. Almost most of the people that I have brought on here are mostly people that are born and raised in New York because they understand the culture and like kind of want to keep that restored.
Absolutely. So, tell you about Jojo's Ventures. We are a Black-owned New York City tourism company. Uh, been in New York City tourism for over 25 years, but I got the passion to start Jojo's Ventures about 10 years ago. My passion for history and culture comes from a discussion that I had with a high school teacher here in New York during Black History Month, where my interest for certain history figures was pretty much discouraged. And from that conversation, the genesis of JoJo's Ventures occurred. Me wanting to get more interested in Black history, more wanting to know more about the city, and those type of discussions. That discussion led towards what we have here with JoJo's Ventures.
Nice, nice. So, as far as like the tours and everything, you said that you started before. Did you have that idea and just like, oh, I just want to start, or did you start from somewhere else, work somewhere else and got into
Well,
it?
being in the industry for a long time, I saw how other people put business together and how other people had made a success. And I told myself, hey, if I could do it for other people, I could do it for myself too.
Hmm.
And that's when the entrepreneur bug kicked in, if you will, because you making a success for other people. I've always been the man behind the man behind the woman, you
Yeah.
know, I've always been that cog on the wheel, making things run.
Hmm.
And I said, hey, I need to do this for myself too, because, if I can do this for other people, I, I sure can do this for me.
Yeah. No, that's dope. So, as far as like, what do you do now? As far as do you do tours in every borough, or is it like specific areas?
No, all of my tours are in all five boroughs of New York City.
Oh, nice. So,
One of the things that's kind of unhurled is the importance of Black history in New York City. There's a lot of stuff that's told, but there's a lot of stuff that's not told, and it's not told correctly. So, being, I guess you could call me a historian, if you will, or someone who's just interested in the history.
yeah.
We research, you learn the stories of the people who came before you and what their contributions were to this city. We often don't get the proper credit that's due for the genesis of this city. People date us back to the Great Migration period, but we've been here since the early beginnings of this country.
Hmm.
And there are people who have contributed to this city, just like the presidents, just like Washington, just like Hamilton, just like Thomas Jefferson. They were people who were here that helped build this city up from the roots. And some stories are told, but a lot of them are not.
Hmm. So where do you typically get? Obviously it's a little bit easier now with the resource like internet and everything, but where do you get a lot of like the not only like the history of it, but know like okay, this is the location of where it happened.
Well, I'm a big fan of documentaries of books.
Okay.
So The New York City Public Library is my best friend, or research centers are my best friends. I spend a lot of time in the different borough historical societies. I do my research there. I also go to the public libraries. Like there are a lot of books written on New York City and New York City Black history. But like I said, the information is there. It's just not being taught.
Hmm.
And I have a lot of mentors who are historians and who could tell the stories
Yeah.
because things, I'm only 41, so so much that I could tell, but there's so many people who's older than me who were able to tell the stories of what they were told or what they researched or what they've learned. So I learned from my mentors and mentees. I learned from them.
Nice, nice. I mean, yeah, I mean, there is a lot of history. I mean, even I grew up in Flatbush in Brooklyn, and like around me, there's like in the last few years, there's so many stories and things that I've seen that I knew, like I saw when I was a kid, but I never really realized what it was. Like there's a old, I think it's like a slave, like burial site, like right on Church Ave where
Yep,
Erasmus is. And
the
like,
Reformed Church. Yeah, and that was recently discovered.
yeah, yeah, and I've lived here I lived in this area my whole life, and I just learned about that a couple years ago. So like, yeah, I mean, I think that what you're doing is great. Even like I just found out about like I think in like downtown Brooklyn, there's like a house that was like a
The abolition house.
yeah. And that's like in the heart of down. I mean, if you're from Brooklyn, that's where you were, like, your whole life, and you never. I just found that out maybe, yeah, like a couple years ago. So it's like, I think like things like this is great because a lot of people don't really. I mean, obviously, when you think of Black people in America, African Americans, you think in mostly the South, but I think New York had like second most slaves. I think in any state. That's one point. So it's like it's a lot of history here. It's a lot. It's a lot.
So my goal is just to portray that history, tell those stories, let people know what the contributions were in New York City, and I've just garnered a lot of interest. I don't know if it's because of the times, or I don't know if it's because people feel that it's a void that needs to be filled, but the time is right. It's right now to tell
Yeah.
these stories. And we see what's happening. I was a victim of critical race theory before critical race theory with the story I told you what happened to me in high school. And to see what the country has done, and especially in the southern states where they've eliminated Black history as some of their courses or made it illegal to teach, it's almost like deja vu for me. So, for the kids that are growing up, for the people who are interested, it's my duty to continue, to be able to tell those stories that, people don't want to be told.
Yeah, no, I mean that's great. I mean that it is great. I mean, because things like that. I mean, the things that you know now, or the things that I know now. If we knew these things as kids, it would change the outlook of how we look at this city. I mean, like I mean, we learn obviously we do learn a little bit about like the more recent history of New York City, like with African Americans, but it doesn't even get in like we really don't know. Only certain people know about like the real history of the city.
It's like it's not in depth. It's
Yeah,
like it's a layer. And then
yeah,
you gotta realize that there's layers under layers under layers.
yeah,
But that first layer may be a lot for some people, so they don't tend
yeah.
to go as deep as you would want to.
So out of all the places, this might be a tough question. So, out of all the places that you've gone, and like, what do you think are some of the most memorable like places that you've visited around the city?
That's very interesting. Well, just learning the history of Lower Manhattan is one. Learning how African slaves and formerly enslaved Africans built the wall on Wall Street.
Hmm.
Right there, we have the financial district, we have Federal Hall, we have all those iconic places that's tied with American history. But there's nothing there to tell the story of us. And if you go a few blocks down towards by the water, that used to be an old slave market
Hmm.
where Africans were traded and enslaved. We were some of the first things that was sold on what was to become the stock market.
Yeah. Wow.
So when you think about the foundations of this country and this city, and you see the development and you see how they're praised, as a Black person, you can't but think about the past. You can't but think about how we weren't part of that foundation.
Yeah. No, man, and that's it's great that you're able to tell the history of that because I mean we don't know New Yorkers don't really typically know the history of like the like even like the street names like I just said Wall Street like it was so it's like it's great that you're able to tell these stories.
Well, here's a tidbit for you too. In Brooklyn, so during the pandemic, there was an organization that was around that was actually telling the stories of the street names, the Nostrans, the Lefferts, the
Hmm.
Stuyvesants. A lot of them were all Dutch settlers that originally settled in this country, and they all owned slaves.
Yeah.
So there was a campaign. I remember walking through Bed-Stuy, and on the polls they would say Nostrand owned slaves, Lefferts owned slaves. You know, those families were slave owners.
Yeah.
People who might not have any idea. Like, is it relevant to know that right now? Probably, to understand the history of this city, because that's something that's not really talked about as much.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that you want to know. I mean, it's just the same way that if you, I mean, we learned about the history of America from other sides. So it's like this is something that you do want to know, especially if you live here. It's like, I mean, these are the streets that you're on. And you want to know where the name came from. And actually, like when I saw you, you were talking about like you were talking about like when I saw you online, you were talking about there's a carrot cake um carrot cake spot in well, I think it's Harlem or the Bronx,
Yes.
the Bronx. And it's like even things like that is like I've heard about that spot for years. I'm from Brooklyn, so I've never been there, but I've heard about that spot for a long time. And it's like it's historical. It's a historical spot. So it's like even things like that, it's like I mean my family has been in this area, like in the Flatbush area for well over 60 years at this point. So it's like there's a lot of things that's changed in the area for good and bad. Like even like the thing what we talked about before on Church Ave, like the burial ground, it's like that wasn't there when we were younger. So I feel like things like this and people like you that are spreading like the gospel of New York. Like so I feel like this is a great time. This it always is a good time, but this is definitely a good time because I feel like as you said, like things are trying to get forgotten. And it's
Yes.
like you want to keep it because a lot of people do want to know about it. Even the younger generation, they definitely want to know the history of the city.
Well, it's a form of cultural preservation.
Yeah.
We see the real estate boom and we see everything growing or being developed in front of our very eyes, but there's nothing to tell what was once there. Like I walked through the city so much, and I'm like, I remember when such and such was here. I remember when that was there, and there's nothing there to tell what was there. So it's almost
Yeah.
like my existence is being erased as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, I actually just thought about that too, because I mean, I'm still in the area that I grew up in. So I was walking to get food the other day, and I'm like, this is like, I couldn't imagine how like my grandparents, if they were able to see this, like, and they were here 60, 50, 60 years ago, like, they wouldn't even be able to believe like what's going on right now.
They wouldn't recognize their Flatbush.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
My grandparents would recognize their Harlem, you know.
Yeah.
So I often have to remind myself that sometimes too. I have those same thoughts as well.
Yeah, yeah. And it's crazy because I mean I thought about it from my grandparents first, but then I'm like even me, like I see the difference. So there's no way that like my dad and my aunt, they grew up in the same area. So and then so it's like it felt like it's like it just by generation. I mean, compared to even the younger generation, they don't know the Flatbush that I grew up in. So it's crazy to see. I mean, it's good and bad. There's parts of it that I do like. So, but the preservation part is the part that you got to keep, and that's why I wanted to start like this platform too, because I've been going to a lot of businesses that are people that, as I said, are from New York, so they still try to preserve the history and the culture of New York, which is great, and that's why I wanted to really bring you on here because I knew that you had a story to tell. So.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, and just encourage, if you're interested in New York City history, check out JoJo's Ventures NYC, and whatever I could do. I, I'm we need to have, and there's somebody who has a story similar to me, or somebody who's growing up that will have a story similar to mine. So you want to encourage or be that encouragement to them. You want to be able to start that trend. So for those who are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs and getting rid of the daily grind, hopefully I'm an influence or some type, inspiration to somebody.
Definitely, definitely. So I always like to ask everyone this that has a business, well, a couple questions, but first one is, what would you tell yourself like when you first started? Like if you go back and tell yourself one thing about like the journey and what you're going to go through, like what would you tell yourself?
Be patient. It won't come right now, but it'll come at the right time. Make sure you're financially prepared to start the business, meaning that you have something to save, because that's your only bread and butter. Like, most people aren't working as they're being entrepreneurs, and it could become stressful. So try to alleviate as much stress as possible.
All right. And I always like to ask, what do you think was the just think about the whole journey that you from starting to now? What do you think was the toughest part of the journey, and what do you think was like the most gratifying part?
Toughest part of the journey for me was making the decision if I wanted to take this journey. Um, I had a health scare about 4 years ago where I could have not been here right now.
Hmm.
And the fact that I survived is a story within itself. I said, life is not done with me yet. There's still more that I have to contribute to this. And of course, you have fear, you have intimidation, you have nervousness. And for me, it was taking that and saying, you can do this. You've seen other people do it. You've done it for other people. Why can't you do it for yourself? That was the hardest part for me. The triumphs is actually seeing the work in progress, seeing over the last year alone, seeing the progress of the business, seeing the progress of networking, seeing the progress of being out there, people knowing who I am. Like you said, you saw me on the video,
Yeah.
and that intrigued you to contact me. So you would have never known about my story if I hadn't shared it.
Yes, exactly.
So just taking that courage to take those next steps has been very gratifying.
No, and I mean, I speak to a lot of different entrepreneurs, and I think that the main thing that almost everyone says is, especially when a lot of people don't want to promote themselves or be out there, it just, I mean, obviously it depends on the personality of the person, but a lot of people they don't want to like talk about their story, but that's what how you bring people in, because if people, the more that people know about you, they're like, okay, let me find out more. So I think that's the toughest part from like all businesses that are all people that are like places that I've gone, a lot of people that I've spoke to is like, I think that's one of the toughest parts is just bringing people in with you. Because I feel like we're especially people, New Yorkers, we're the type of people that we don't want people in our business. We
Right.
want to stick to ourselves, but you can't be like that if you got to bring people in, and I think that's been like through everyone that I spoke to. I think that was like the number one thing where people kind of some people struggled, and I mean even myself, like as I started to do things like this, I was like, do I want to, I always wanted to find out more about people, so I'm like, you got to be able to bring people in sometimes.
Sure.
So thank you again for joining. So let the people know like where we can find you if you have anything coming up, about the tours, all that good stuff.
Sure. Well, springtime is coming up, so that'd be a great time to take a New York City tour. I do tours in all five boroughs. All of my tours have different themes and aspects, whether it's Black history, whether it's just traditional tour, wanting to see Midtown Manhattan. I cover all aspects of New York City tourism. You can find me at Jojo's Ventures NYC on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all of the major platforms, Facebook. And feel free to ask some questions.
Thank you, thank you. So you can find us Evolution Movement, Evolution_Movement NYC on Instagram. Thank you again, Joseph. This was great. I appreciate it. And like that, we out here.